Okay, my planet is being murdered, and I am taking that personally. Another 120 species went extinct today. They were my kin. We are so out of time. So 3 questions. What is that murder made of? Who's in charge? And how do we stop them? Now, none of that is cognitively challenging. It may be emotionally difficult, it may be ideologically difficult, but cognitively, that's not a toughie. And that's why I'm mostly bewildered, because the environmental movement is not telling the truth, and I don't know why. What are we so afraid of? I mean, what can they do to us that's worse than killing the planet? Like my friend Eric McBay says, well, they're going to kill the planet twice. So clearly we have some emotional and ideological blinders to naming the methods of destruction and the perpetrators. Now, I know it is hard to name a perpetrator. It is always easier to blame the bystander, and it's definitely easier to blame the victim. And we also don't grow up in a culture that encourages critical thought or radical thought or really any thought. So I think most of us spend our righteous years trying to put together a critical framework that will explain why the world is such a mess. That framework will give us 3 things. It gives us meaning, it gives us some kind of ethical imperative, and it also gives us sanity. The culture at large is not going to give us those things, and human beings need them. So it's understandable that we become attached to the kind of framework that gives us that sort of basic human meaning in the world. But what will happen in every life are challenges to that framework. I mean, we have life experiences that don't fit. When I was 20, I had a biology professor who said this sentence: "The moment you put a plow to soil, you degrade that soil." Now, I'd already been a vegan for 4 years. I was a teenage vegan. And that was a bad moment for me. I thought I was saving the world. But in that moment, I watched it all fall like dominoes. Now, we can respond to these kinds of challenges in different ways. We can engage with the new information and see if our framework really holds. We can also turn from that information because it's too scary. And that's what I did in that moment. I ran. Because other times we're left in the rubble. And that is never a fun day. Ultimately, that was what happened to me. So I know half of you are thinking, she wrote a book against vegetarians. Yeah, you can't be against vegetarians. And who would publish this book? Yeah, Voldemort and Sons. So I need to start by saying that I was a vegan for 20 years. I have been as deeply into that world as one can be. I also did permanent damage to my body. My health failed catastrophically. And that was the only thing that could have shaken me loose from such an intense identity. The thing about being a vegan is that it's not just what you eat, it's who you are. And I know that. So I know what it's costing some of you to be here tonight, and I appreciate that you're trying. I also want to be very clear that the underlying values of vegetarianism are not at issue. So justice, sustainability, compassion, anything that questions human entitlement, those are the only values that are going to get us to the world that we need. It's the motivating ethic of my life. So that's not the problem. I mean, the problem is information. And this is a cultural ignorance about the nature of agriculture as opposed to the nature of nature. Now, even on the farthest fringes of the environmental movement, no one is questioning agriculture. They don't know that they should, and they don't know how. So a lot of this is going to be really new information, and I just want to acknowledge that it's a lot to absorb in 45 minutes, so thank you in advance for trying. Okay, the nature of nature and the nature of agriculture. Those 2 things are completely at odds. So to cut to the punchline, one is a war against the other. So you have to understand what agriculture is. You take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it, and I mean down to the bacteria, and then you plant it to human use. It's biotic cleansing. So this lets the human population grow to gigantic proportions, because instead of sharing that land with millions of other creatures, you're only growing humans on it. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2, besides the fact that you've permanently displaced any number of species, and when I say displaced, that's a nice way to say extinction. The other problem, of course, is that you're destroying the topsoil every time you do this. And topsoil is the basis of life. or at least terrestrial life. We owe our entire existence to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. So right about now, if you're following this, you should be getting a cold chill of horror. Because except for the 46 last remaining tribes of hunter-gatherers, the human race has made itself dependent on an activity that is killing the planet. Lauren Cordain, who's an expert on Paleolithic nutrition, says, "We have wandered down a path toward absolute dependence on cereal grains, a path for which there is no return." That's because 80% of the food calories that are used to support this huge human population, those come from agriculture. And in the getting of those calories, well, 98% of the American prairie is gone. 99% of the topsoil in the Canadian prairie is gone, precisely because it's not a prairie anymore. When it was a prairie, it was protecting and building soil. Now, completely gone. So what the human race has done is made itself utterly dependent on the destruction of our planet. See what I mean about the cold chill of horror? Okay, insert moment of humor. I was writing this book. I got very excited one day because on the New York Times bestseller list was Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. And soon after that came Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle. And I thought, this is a great moment to be writing this book because there's clearly a lot of interest in asking way deeper questions about food and food politics and sustainability. So I called my ex, and I'm all pumped. I'm like, look what's happening right now across the culture. It's a great moment to be writing this book, and I'm all excited until she says to me, Lierre, those books are food plus funny stories. Everybody likes those books. Your book is food plus the apocalypse. Do you see the difference? So I'm like, yeah, right. Actually, the really funny thing is that she hadn't even read the book yet. So nobody knows you like your ex. Okay, so food plus apocalypse. We have to talk about overshoot. Now, William Catton wrote a book, 1984. It was called Overshoot. How many of you have heard of this book? How many of you have read it? Oh, this is very bad. Everybody needs to read this book, like everybody on the planet. He makes a distinction between takeover and drawdown. Now, the takeover method is how nature works. Every creature out there is trying to get their day in the sun. So there's this constant back and forth about who's going to fill which ecological niche. And when it's your moment, you've taken over a niche. Okay, so that's called takeover. And eventually you're not as good at it as somebody else gets better, and you sort of fall off the evolutionary tree. It's just how life works, and it actually gives the whole community a lot of resilience because it sort of change. We can respond to change as a whole community. So it's not a bad thing. It's just how it all works, and so that's called takeover. The other method that species use to increase their numbers is called drawdown. Now, a lot of writers, the peak oil writers and resource depletion writers, they identify the year 1800 as the beginning of the drawdown age. And that's because in 1800, humans start using fossil fuel. So coal, oil, gas, the Industrial Revolution gets underway, and what we're using is stored sunlight. I mean, the source of energy is still the sun, okay? But this is basically drops of sunlight that are stored beneath the crust of the earth, and somebody figured out how to extract them, how to use them. This is temporary, all right? Those forms of energy do not reproduce, and they will not come again. The little drops of oil don't actually get a birds and bees talk from the big drops of oil, okay? When it's done, it will be over. So we've temporarily increased the carrying capacity of the planet for humans. Once it's over, we're headed for some pretty nasty times. And that's really what nobody in this culture wants to face, the fact that these are non-replicating resources that will not come again. Okay, so they make this distinction, 1800. That's the moment when drawdown becomes, or takeover becomes drawdown. And very smart people, very courageous people, they do great work. About this, they are wrong. My point here is that agriculture itself is also drawdown. And what we are drawing down is fossil soil. And that is the concept I would like to insert into this dialogue. So to give you a number, one season of plow cropping, your basic annual monocrop, so wheat, corn, soy, whatever, one season, you can blow through 2,000 years of topsoil. So this is drawdown in a really big way. and our culture has no awareness of what it's doing. So when I say that soil is the basis of life, what does that mean? Well, soil is not just insensate dirt. We can't just throw some more minerals on it and hope for the best. It's alive. It's animate. And it's alive past our wildest imaginings. If you can picture a tablespoon of soil, that can contain over 1 million different living creatures. And if you can picture a square meter, so just a box, basic box, that can contain over 1,000 different species of animals. Now, those creatures are the ones that are doing the basic work of life, usually degrading. Plants produce, right? They take sunshine and they make, cellulose or whatever out of it. And then these little tiny creatures degrade, essentially. They also help the plants in a lot of different ways, and really complex, amazing, and awe-inspiring relationships that happen in the soil. But without them, we are all dead. And when we do agriculture, we're destroying all of that. So Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, he says that agriculture was the biggest mistake the human race has ever made. Toby Hemingway calls agriculture, sustainable agriculture, an oxymoron. Now, I agree with both of them. This was a huge mistake, and I don't think that the human race is at all prepared to face what we've done by taking up agriculture. One reason I say that is because the people who should care the most, which is to say environmentalists, don't even identify this as a problem. Meanwhile, agriculture is the single most destructive activity that humans have done to the planet. It's the single most destructive activity. Eventually burning fossil fuel will outstrip that. Okay, so then it'll be the second most destructive activity. To really understand this concept of fossil fuel, we need to get the next concept, which is perennial polyculture. Okay, there's two words, perennial, polyculture. Now, perennial are plants that live a long time. And that means that they've got these really big, complicated root systems. This is the matrix that holds the soil in place, and literally holds it physically in place. Without those roots, the soil just washes away. And the other half of that phrase is polyculture, and that just means a whole bunch of plants. And they're all working together in various ways. There's ways that they compete, there's ways that they cooperate, but all together, their job is to create and protect more topsoil. So this phrase, perennial polyculture, this is the phrase of the millennium. If we've got any hope for the future of life on this planet, it's because we restored and repaired those perennial polycultures. Now, nature creates a bunch of different kinds of perennial polycultures, but it's the same template. So it's forests, wetlands, savannas, tundras, and prairies. But it's the same idea. You've got a whole bunch of plants. They generally live a long time, and their job is to create essentially more life. And this is why so many indigenous cultures have a concept of plants as our elders, our parents, our beloved grandparents, because plants are the creatures that made the oxygen-rich atmosphere that blankets our planet and made animal life possible. They also created the topsoil, which was the cradle for animal life. And how have we repaid them? Well, remember what agriculture is. You pull down the forest, you plow up the prairie. You destroy the perennial polyculture. And what you grow instead are annual monocrops. Now, that's the exact opposite. Annuals only grow for a brief season or two. It's just long enough to produce a big seed. The metaphor I like to use, if you cut your skin, you get a Band-Aid, and you put a Band-Aid on that skin. That's an emergency, right? Your skin is open. You don't want that to happen. And the Band-Aid will hold it together until your skin knits back, okay, and seals up over the wound. Well, there are wounds that happened in nature as well. There's fires, there's floods, there's tornadoes, earthquakes, all kinds of things can happen, and the soil is bared. So just like the cut in your skin, this is an emergency for the planet. And that is the moment that annuals fulfill their purpose. They will spring to life in that bare soil. An annual seed cannot compete against the perennial root, that root mat of the perennials. But when that is cleared for some reason, for some terrible emergency, that's when the annuals spring to life. Those seeds have lain dormant in the soil. This is their moment in the sun. They spring to life. They've only got a season or two, because just like your skin knitting back together, the perennials start to close in, to heal up that wound again. So in that moment, all the annuals, all of their energy goes to producing that seed. That's their only strategy for reproduction, is a seed. So their seeds are big. And what this means, of course, is that some of them are big enough to be worth it to humans to try to eat. So all of there's the plants that humans have learned to domesticate. I mean, it all starts with the annual grains, which were once annual grasses.